国当地时间2013年12月8号到12月18号，我们走访了美国的洛杉矶、圣地亚哥、芝加哥、斯普林菲尔德、西雅图、戴维斯6个地区。在这些地方，对美国的专家学者和普通民众进行了将近30场访问，目的是初步了解转基因食品在美国的情况，还有人们对转基因食品的态度。
GMO beans, I wouldn't know that.
没听说过这个词
You
是
have
吧？
never heard of the word
Actually, no.
genetically modified organism.
Mm-hmm.
So you've never heard of it.
Oh, then I have probably. Yeah, just the.
他
Yeah.
说他可能还是听说过，但是没有听说过这个简称来的。
啊，豆子在这儿啊。你这里卖过这个转基因的黄豆吗？转基因的大豆啊。
GMO soya beans.
Have we ever sold GMO soy? Not that I know of in bulk. No, never.
他们说他不知道，他应该没有。
你能分辨吗？这两种黄豆
Can you differentiate the soya beans from GMO soya beans and non-GMO?
From the appearance, no. We usually go by what's labeled on the bag and the information that's told to us by our management.
转基因是否安全，有没有争议？在我们去美国之前，美国大使馆农业处的工作人员联系到我们，希望我们采访在加州大学戴维斯分校从事生物技术研究的马廷娜教授。他受邀来到中国进行转基因推广的学术交流。
So the older generation of biotech products were not, even for scientists themselves, would not have been perfected. They're perfectly safe, they're perfectly fine, but the newer technologies mean that we are even better able to introduce traits with improved characteristics than we were in the past. So it's like any technology, it evolves.
我想问马蒂娜教授，就是关于这个转基因的食品，在这个科学家内部是不是有争论？因为我们在中国听到的是没有争论，凡是去争论的都是不懂，或者说都是白痴。
So the vast majority of scientists who read the peer-reviewed literature and who do the research themselves are determined that this technology is as safe, if not safer, than older technologies. And there really isn't a dispute among most scientists. So the preponderance of evidence supports one particular point of view. You may have some dissident scientists, but they are very few, and most of the information that they provide does not have a basis in sound science.
在西雅图北部的一个小岛上，我们访问了西华盛顿大学的退休教授安西·斯万森。他是一名曾就职于美国海军的科学家，在美国拥有5个专利。他擅长通过数据统计进行结论分析。对于反对转基因的科学家没有科学基础支持这一说法，他提出了不同的意见。他通过数据分析，为我们展示了转基因作物、草甘膦和人的疾病之间的相关联系。草甘膦是一种广谱除草剂，广泛用于转基因作物。让我们耐心一点，听听他的分析。现在中国的公众非常关心这个转基因的作物，大家都在争论这件事，尤其是转基因作物、草甘膦和人的疾病之间的联系啊。我们知道您收集了很多这方面的数据。
I had been hearing about the horrible increase in all kinds of diseases, childhood diseases, ADHD, autism, older people diseases, Alzheimer's, dementia, neurological diseases, and diabetes, kidney disease. All of these diseases in the United States have been skyrocketing. And the only thing, so it has to be something in the environment. I mean, it can't be genetic, only genetic. There must be something in the environment.
他知道这个转基因食品这件事吗？
He wants to ask you, do you know the term of genetic engineer?
Genetic GMO?
Yeah, GMO. Yeah.
I've heard of it.
Yeah.
他知道哈。你平时会吃这种食物吗
No.
No.
为什么呢？
Why?
Because I actually have an autoimmune disorder, and I've learned a lot that part of my getting sick has been some of the food that I've been eating in my life, and it's not clear. I don't have any that it's GMOs, but I've started to stay away from them for that reason.
And so it occurred to me that the only thing that's really changed that much in the last 15 to 20 years is the genetically engineered food and the amount of glyphosate. And glyphosate is considered totally safe, so they spray it on everything. So what I did was I went to the Center for Disease Control. I went to the National Cancer Institute and all of these databases, and I searched for data, epidemiological data, which is time trend data, and I compared it directly with the amount of glyphosate, this blue curve, and with the percent of GE crops of corn and soy, this blue curve. And I found several cancers that correlate, and the correlation just tells how well they track. If one changes, does the other one change? If there were a cause and effect, you would expect that. But just because you get a good correlation doesn't necessarily mean there's a cause and effect. But all of these correlation numbers are greater than 0.9. A correlation of 1 is perfect. To tell you what that means, a correlation of 0.98 or better, you can calibrate a scientific instrument by. So this one is telling. We have the yellow. This is 1990 right here. This almost didn't even happen prior to 1990. And now we have this glyphosate. We have the genetically engineered crops. We have the correlation coefficient between glyphosate applied to corn and soy at 0.9775. Here we have stroke. So remember, hypertension can lead to stroke. This is non-embolic stroke. So this means it's not a blood clot or an embolism. It's just in the brain, the vein just suddenly explodes for no reason. And once again, these are deaths per 100,000 people. We start at 1980. We go to 2010. Here's the glyphosate. Here's the genetically engineered crops. This one has a correlation of 0.982 between the stroke and the genetically engineered crops.
Do you know GMO?
Oh, yes.
GMO.
你怎么看待这种食品呢？
So what's your opinion on GMO?
It's horrible. It's sort of like nuclear power, I think, in terms of it's something very dangerous that we cannot control, because even when farmers don't want to produce that sort of product, the wind is indiscriminate, and it will carry the pollen of GMO foods onto non-GMO plants and crops, and it's something that we're going to lose control of, and we've already begun to lose control of, and it's horrible.
So the yellow is the deaths per 100,000 due to obesity. The correlation coefficient between the obesity deaths and glyphosate, the glyphosate curve, is 0.97. According to the Sansel and Sennett paper, the glyphosate blocks the liver from creating bile, and that helps to break down the fats. So your body is not metabolizing the fats. And that might not sound like a big deal, but the people who have this problem, they have an inflamed pancreas, they have an enlarged liver, they have an enlarged spleen, they have the secondary illnesses are obesity, diabetes, heart disease. This is the incidence of diabetes in the United States. Prior to 1990, this was flat. Starting about 1992, it started climbing until it just took off. The correlation coefficient between the percentage of genetically engineered soy crops is 0.976 and 0.9664 with glyphosate. So they are tracking, all of these diseases are tracking very well with the glyphosate applications and with the percentage of genetically engineered crops.
那你现在会想办法避免吃到这个转基因的食品吗？
Oh, absolutely. No GMO foods. I had cancer before, and my conventional doctors were also upset with me because they wanted me to do radiation and chemotherapy. It was a very advanced stage of cancer. And I chose for 1 month to eat only organic and raw foods. And in that month, the tumor disappeared. And the doctors, nobody could believe it. But I did CAT scan, MRI, etc., everything, and it actually disappeared.
有一个细节在这里需要专门给大家说明一下。当我们在调查中提到非转基因这个概念的时候，美国人通常都用有机这个词。现在很多食品，就是像你买的食品上，很多它没有标志，您不知道它是不是含转基因。
A lot of products do not have labels of GMO or non-GMO.
包括到外面餐馆吃。
Organic products are not GMO.
他们这么说，是因为美国农业部对有机食品认证的标准有：不使用杀虫剂、激素、抗生素，不使用放射性照射，不使用转基因等生物技术。
You buy food with an organic label on it, it's not GMO.
所以这次调查中，我们所谈到的有机概念，指的就是非转基因。
Sure.
转基因作物和食品究竟是否安全？说到转基因农作物、转基因食品，大家最关心的就是它到底安全不安全。我们这次调查讨论最多的，也就是这个问题。为此，我们采访到了美国国家大豆实验研究室的助理总监布里吉特·欧文。
GMOs are a topic that is discussed around the world. It's also a topic that has been researched significantly for many years. And there's been a great deal of research and also risk assessment done with GM products around the world. And all of the studies have found no risk to human health, animal health, or to the environment. And all the many research that have been done here in the United States and elsewhere in the world.
关于转基因大豆的这个风险这个研究，您做过多少相关的实验？
When we look at the scientific evidence that's been done by all kinds of organizations, we find that GM products are safe.
在洛杉矶，临床医生罗宾·波恩霍夫特对转基因产品是安全的这一观点提出了自己不同的看法。
There have been about 8 or 9 animal experiments in different species, rats, rabbits, rodents of one sort or another mostly. Each of them has found some abnormality, hemorrhage of the pancreas, hemorrhage of the liver, problems with the pituitary, and consistently in all the species that I'm aware of, all the studies I'm aware of, damage to the intestine. And that is really important because there's been breakdown of intestinal integrity consistently in every animal study that's been done, and that has huge impact on humans. Breakdown of intestinal integrity is considered to be a cause of many problems in humans, including type 1 diabetes.
在圣地亚哥的索尔克生物研究院，大卫·舒伯特教授的研究和转基因作物中的 Bt 毒蛋白有关。他对转基因产品的安全性提出了质疑。
And Bt toxin, I think, is a good example. And so Bt toxin is in most, I believe, the rice crops and the corn, and not so much the soy, but rice and corn and eggplants and a lot of sugar beets. And Bt toxin, so this is some area which I know something about because my research over the years has been involved in these type of proteins. And if there are a number of papers showing that this Bt toxin, when consumed in feed like animal feed, and there was a recent paper on pigs, or if you feed it to rodents, rats, mice, there's intestinal inflammation, there's a problem with the intestines. And this is exactly what would be predicted from this type of protein that can go, you eat it and it gets into the gut and then it inflames, it binds to the surface of the intestines and it causes these problems, initially inflammation, which is going to lead to cancer.
2011年，南京大学生命科学院院长张晨宇教授课题组 在国际刊物《细胞研究》上发表了一篇论文，证明外源性的植物微小核糖核酸可以在多种动物的血清和组织内检测到，并且主要是通过进食的方式摄入体内的。也就是说，这项报告表明，我们吃转基因食品的时候，可以摄入食物的遗传信息片段。洛杉矶的高级手术医师伊拉卡斯也从人体基因敏感性的角度，为我们阐述了他对转基因产品安全性的担心。
What I have found is that there are people that are more genetically susceptible to being poisoned by whatever's in the environment, pesticides, herbicides, whatever it is, whatever's in the GMO products. Now you say, well, why isn't everyone affected by GMOs? Why are certain people sick and others not? And we call that the canaries in the coal mine, if you know that story. It's that they used to have canaries down in the coal mine, and when the canary died, they knew that there was gas, there was poison gas. A canary is a little songbird, little yellow bird. And when the canary died, they knew to get out of the mine because there was poison gas.
伊拉卡斯医生讲的煤矿里的金丝雀的故事，向我们充分说明了，当涉及到生命安全领域的问题出现时，我们要以最脆弱的样本作为判断标准。也就是说，当转基因产品可能威胁到基因敏感的人群时，我们就不能判定它对人类是安全的。
We've seen a rise in all kinds of disease and disorders, both behavioral as well as physical. Everything from the trend increasing in cancers and asthmas, autism, allergies, diabetes, obesity. And while there are many factors that one can say contributes to these illnesses, we have found more and more that with the relationship of the foods that we eat, and particularly GMOs and gut health, that it's very much a contributor.
但是很多支持转基因的人说，没有证据证明这些事情和转基因食品有关系。
In the human population, we are getting testimonies from mothers across the country who have healed their children by removing GMOs, and we are finding more scientists who are not biased, that are able to do studies and come forward with results that prove that GMOs are dangerous.
在美国，有一个叫“妈妈纵横美国”的民间组织，它的成员都是坚决抵制转基因产品的美国妈妈。
My children also had health issues. They had issues that were autoimmune issues, trouble fighting off infection.
And we see in our children every day the difference that it makes. So we don't care what they say. We know that it's affecting our children, and when we take these foods out of their diet, they improve, their health improves. So that says everything to us.
It's frustrating for us as mothers because we know as a group, Zen and I have been collecting hundreds of stories on our website from other mothers, from other families who have health problems that have gone away when they have stopped eating GMO food. We wish that our scientists and government would look into this and please consider that. We wish that they would please consider that perhaps this kind of raising food with chemicals and pesticides is not as safe as they once thought. That chronic exposure is showing that animals and people are being affected.
美国人是否已经放心地吃了将近20年转基因食品？在国内，支持转基因的人一直在说，美国人都放心地吃了转基因食品10几20年了，那么我们中国人也可以吃。针对这一说法，我们在美国也进行了直接的求证。
In the United States of America, most people don't even know what a GMO is. They've been eating it for almost 20 years, and a lot of them have never even heard of it.
在中国争论的时候，很多支持转基因的人说，美国人已经放心地吃了差不多20年转基因食品。
I'd like to say that what you said points out one of the great ironies here, which is that people in China are using our consumption of GMO foods as a case as to why we can't eat them. But the reality is that we haven't been aware that we've been consuming these products for 18 years.
克里斯多弗·爱德华兹是我们这次走访美国的摄影师。1年半以前，他出于好奇心，开始拍摄转基因在美国情况的纪录片。
There's the difference.
他为我们提供了一段由他拍摄的视频。在这段视频里，农场主把非转基因玉米和转基因玉米的玉米粒分别放在地上，让鸟来吃。我们可以清晰地看到，当非转基因玉米粒被寻食的鸟吃光的时候，转基因玉米粒还剩了很多。在拍摄过程中，克里斯多弗·爱德华兹由最初的客观调查者转变为一名反对转基因的人。
I have interviewed people who are very much in support of genetic engineering. You have people who sincerely believe that this is good because they've read the material that supports what the industry would like you to believe.
在芝加哥，伊利诺伊州大豆协会推荐我们去拜访了3位农场主，他们的农场都是主要种植转基因作物的。
We started growing the genetically enhanced seeds back in about 1996 or 1997. You can use no-till farming or minimum till farming if you're using a biotech seed. I'd like to just tell you a short, brief story about acceptance of biotech. When I was a child, part of the job that you did in the summer as a child on a farm is when you're raising soybeans is you would go out in the fields. Well, first, your father would go through the field and he'd cultivate with something like little shovels on a tractor. And you would till out the weeds as much as you can. You'd get up early in the morning, you'd go out with your hoe, literally a hoe or something, and you would hoe the weeds out in between your plants. I mean, it's a really big job, and it's hot, dirty work. And if you have 1 hectare or something is one thing, but if you have hundreds of acres of soybeans, it was a big job. And when you have when you can spray it with Roundup, and it takes care of the weeds that are not only in the row but are in between the plants, you adopt it quickly because it's such an easier, more efficient way of controlling your weed pressure or your weed issues that you have in a field. Did you do that as a child? And, yeah, I mean, it was a nasty job. We didn't like it.
你们作为种植者其实很辛苦，但是现在的情况是，关于这个转基因作物，在美国、在中国、在欧洲都有很多争论，有很多积极的评价，也有很多这个负面的报道。我不知道你们关注不关注这样的争论，怎么看待这种争论的声音？
We just feel safe that it's a safe product, and as long as the science proves that it's peer-reviewed and it says there's no difference.
在洛杉矶，我们也和当地习耕园和种子库的创始人主席大卫金及他的学生们进行了一场讨论。这是一群不喜欢转基因作物的人。这个在座的这些朋友有没有自己在家里做种植的呢？
So any of you have grown some food in your backyards?
How many of you, raise a show of hands, how many of you actually have grown food in your backyard so far? Started? Fine. Started is fine.
You guys keep your hands up for a minute.
Keep those hands up. Hold them high. We have a majority.
现在其实有很多种子是科学家在实验室里帮我们研制出来的，比如这个转基因的这种种子啊。我们听到的说法是，这个是现代农业的发展方向，也就是说，农业越发展，越会使用这样的种子。你们同意这个观点吗？
Not grow a GMO seed. Do not want to. All right.
Well, for me, it's important because I believe that the engineer seeds, we're breeding the nutrition out of our food by engineering seeds, and medicine is in the food.
我来的时候，他们告诉我说，美国到处都是这个转基因的食品，你躲也躲不开，因为它没有标志。我不知道你们吃不吃转基因的食品，如果你们不想吃，你们有什么办法？
Farmers markets, going to eat organically.
Also, many of us in this class want to learn how to grow our own food in a small urban space in sufficient quantities to feed our families.
I would add also that all of the first world, America has the most unhealthy population. And our unhealthy population, we are also the only nation among the first world that has a large quantity of GMOs in our diet. And I think we're going to find a correlation between that, not only with autoimmune disease, but also in digestive diseases, but also with autism and obesity.
和转基因作物关系密切的草甘膦是否安全？正在讲座的是胡博教授，他是美国普渡大学的植物病理学的名誉教授。他讲座的内容就是转基因作物。胡博教授是美国高级土壤学科学家，是美国农业部国家植物疾病恢复系统的协调员，也是一名退休上校。在过去的40年里，他一直在军事机构评估包括细菌战和疾病爆发在内的自然和人为的生物威胁。
I mention that because when we talk about GMO crops, you need to also talk about the chemicals that 85% of them are genetically engineered to tolerate, and that's glyphosate. We have a few of them that are engineered to produce the Bt toxin. So that with genetically engineered crops, we're really talking about either crops that contain herbicides or crops that contain an insecticide or both, because that's what they're engineered to do.
美国加州大学戴维斯分校的植物病理系教授帕梅拉·罗纳德是一名支持转基因作物的学者。
Glyphosate has been used for many, many years, so it's studied independently of genetically engineered crops. So the scientific consensus, if you look at the Environmental Protection Agency, is that it's less toxic than table salt, right? So the issue with glyphosate, it's clear that it's much less toxic than any other herbicide that's sprayed anywhere around the world. I don't think there's any controversy on that.
然而，美国环保署的一名前高级官员伊万杰罗斯·瓦连纳托斯却不同意草甘膦安全性没有争议的看法。
The chemical itself is killing the very biological organisms responsible for making our food healthy and nutritious. Now, the other impact comes from what we call the glyphosate, for instance. This is a chemical, this is a herbicide, and the corn itself has been modified so that it does not die from this herbicide. So the farmers use this herbicide to kill all the weeds. And then they spray over the corn, and the only thing that survives is the corn. But then when it rains, all this extra herbicide is being washed into the rivers. And then, of course, that will kill millions of fish. And then the herbicide goes into the land, into the topsoil. And within the topsoil, there are microorganisms which are very responsive for the transfer of nutrients to the food that we eat. Now, this herbicide kills these good microorganisms so that the food that we eat is not as nutritious as we think it is. So that's a tremendous impact.
美国爱荷华州的一名农场主也从他的角度向我们解释了草甘膦残留的危害。
Well, what we're seeing, say for example, in hogs right now, very irritable, major problems with reproduction, much more disease susceptible. When they butcher them, their holes are, their intestines, their stomachs are having holes eaten in them. and they're just irritable all the time.
Oh my, that's oh, that's sweet. Oh, that's cute.
这是纪录片导演克里斯多弗·爱德华兹为我们提供的另一段视频资料。吃转基因饲料和不吃转基因饲料的猪宰杀后，胆囊的颜色明显不同。
One major one they're seeing in Germany right now is something called chronic botulism. And what is going on is when you've got Roundup residue in the grain that is fed to the animals, Roundup is a patented bactericide, and the patent number is 7771736. So what it does, it kills the good bacteria in the gut, the Bifidobacterium and the Enterococcus. When those good bacteria are destroyed, then the Clostridium botulinum, which is all around the atmosphere, lives in the soil, produces neurotoxins. It will kill animals. It will give a person chronic fatigue. And in German research, it was found to be maybe the principal cause of crib death among infants because it turns off their breathing muscles.
您知道有的食品里面含转基因吗？叫转基因食品。
Contain GMO ingredients.
It's not
Genetic
supposed.
modified ingredients.
This is not supposed to.
他知道，但是他说应该这里卖的不应该有转基因。
您在意这种食品吗？
I don't want it.
他不希望吃到。
为什么呢
Why?
Because of all the bad things I've heard about it.
他说他听过很多很糟糕的关于这个转基因食物。Okay, she has to.
啊，好。
Thank you very much.
我在中国听到有些人还学过这个生化，他说草甘膦没有什么危害，甚至可以喝一瓶，说喝一瓶它的危害还不如喝一瓶盐水的危害大。
Well, there was a Harvard biochemist that made the statement it was safer than aspirin. But I've challenged different people to have me sit a glass of Roundup in front of them and drink it and prove it to me. None of them have taken that chance yet. And I'll tell them, you might be alive, but you'll be on kidney dialysis machine the rest of your life.
The GMOs actually cause what's called leaky gut syndrome. And this is not mainstream medicine. Mainstream medicine doesn't really talk about leaky gut. But what happens is that when you have the GMO product, glyphosate is made to tear up the intestines or the digestive system of insects. That's how it kills them. So it does the same to people. So we're ingesting a GMO product, a food, with glyphosate, and it rips up our gut, and the absorption gets messed up. It interferes with how things are absorbed, and it makes people allergic to certain foods when they ordinarily would not be. It changes how the digestive system works. So bigger pieces of the foods go into the blood, into your whole system, and goes to all the cells, and actually causes a lot of trouble. And that's where you get psychiatric problems from chemicals, because they go to the brain, and the brain sees this isn't familiar, I don't know what to do with this, and it develops an inflammatory process. It reacts to it, like an allergy, and you can have symptoms like ADD, Alzheimer's, depression, all kinds of brain problems from eating toxic food like GMOs.
This compound has also not been adequately studied, so that we've been told that it's a very safe product. But if you look at the research data, it is a very toxic compound when viewed over time. It's not an acute toxin like cyanide or mercury or this type of a toxin, but as Professors Sanson and Seneff at Massachusetts Institute of Technology in their 2 papers have documented in looking at the biochemical pathways that are changed as a result of the GMO crops and also the chemicals that they contain, you see this, or I would come to the same conclusion that they did in their papers, that this process is probably the most chronically toxic process that we have ever had in the history of agriculture. If you only establish a test for 30 days or 90 days, it isn't going to give you any indication of the chronic toxicity.
在芝加哥，我们见到了美国大豆出口协会的主席兰迪曼。
比如你们在做这个出口的这个测试，提供的这个测试报告的时候哈，它是不是里面有一个这个草甘膦残留的这个容忍度啊？那它的这个容忍度是多少？能残留多少
？To my knowledge, they do, or they do it in the past. I don't know if they continue doing that because it hasn't been proven to show up anywhere, to my knowledge.
说的他们是谁
When you mentioned they,
I'm talking about the government agency, USDA or EPA.
The problem with GMOs is that it's only a tiny bit of pesticide that you keep eating. It's chronic exposure that is the danger. It's cumulative. It happens slowly. It's like cigarettes. If you smoke one cigarette, you don't die on the spot. You get sick after years and years. And it's true that some people can smoke cigarettes and live to be very old. But other people develop cancer. And it's the same with GMOs.
We shouldn't refer to them as GMO plants. We should refer to them as chemical and insecticide-containing plants. We have premature aging and reproductive failure that are becoming very serious problems for us. You look at what percentage of the herd is pregnant. This is data from Mexico to Canada. They just took the 6 herds and highlighted them. 1998, we had a very obvious increase in reproductive failure and miscarriage in some animals. In 1998, he recognized this as a suspect agent. 2002, he was fairly convinced that he always found it in the aborted fetuses.
转基因食品获得了一些权威机构的认证，是否就能说明它的安全性？
We have over 600 peer-reviewed papers. We also have petitions signed by thousands of scientists, including, I believe now, 30 Nobel Prize winners who have determined that these products are safe and that they have been thoroughly tested.
If I'm not mistaken, I believe there are 135 Nobel Prize-winning scientists who believe GMOs are a problem. So it kind of depends on the relationship. That was an ad I saw a couple of years ago.
我们在中国听到别人宣传这个转基因食品的时候，就是他们总在提的就是 FDA、美国农业部、世界卫生组织。那么只要这些机构认为没有问题，那就是没有问题。不能相信其他人的说法。
Science doesn't proceed by authority. The authoritative body doesn't declare something safe. It has to be tested. The way you test it, you start with, depending on what you're testing, bacteria or animals. You feed several different species for a period of time, and you see what happens. You have to do that repeatedly. Then you do human trials, and you study them very carefully, and you see what happens.
Well, let me just tell you something before that, and that is that the FDA scientists, when they first heard about what Monsanto was proposing, said that this is very dangerous. We don't know what's going to happen. To give genetically modified food to people is potentially very dangerous, and it should not be done. And we need a lot more study. What happened was there were some political maneuvers. Things changed. People in the FDA changed. And suddenly, GMO was okay. It was passed by the FDA. Oh, it's perfectly safe. It's perfectly harmless. Now, that's politics. That's not science. So FDA was given the science. They knew the science. But the politics overruled the science and good sense.
That there was a sort of, not a uniform opinion within the agency about this position, about this technology. Scientists like us had their doubts because the studies done about this technology have been very limited. And number two, no government does any kind of original research. The government relies on scientists from the outside to send their reports. And also they rely on the chemical industry itself to tell them something about what the product that they create. Clearly, if you're a chemical company, if you're Monsanto, and you want to have that product approved, you're not likely to give everything that you know to the government, and that's exactly what has happened. History shows that the government, by relying entirely on private corporations to do the studies and the experimental findings for their product, they sometimes do not tell the whole truth.
Many scientists are paid to come out with a certain result. And in the beginning, many scientists were concerned about GMO consumption, and they made pleas to the FDA and the USDA, and they got fired, or they were told to stop speaking, or they were threatened. So sadly, while there are some scientists that try their best to be honest, they can't get their message out there for fear of their well-being or their job or their safety. And other scientists are simply bought by the organizations that pay, the companies that pay them.
I was asked by this very good journal, Nature Biotechnology, to write an article on the potential problems with one aspect of genetically modified, and my training is in immunology. And so one of the concerns of the GM food was recognized by everybody right off very early. So I was asked to write something for Biotechnology Journal on this subject. And so I wrote it, and I thought it was just a straightforward article saying there's some potential problems with this. And everything I wrote, as far as I know, has turned out to be true. But immediately, the next day, I got a call from Monsanto saying that basically, you don't understand the problem, whatever. And then the person who was the head of the Danforth Center, which is the Monsanto Biotechnology drug development part of Monsanto, I mean, not drug development, GM development plant. He wrote a letter to Nature Biotechnology, which he made 17 people sign, or they had 17 people sign it, including 5 of the faculty at Salk Institute. And they basically, the letter said that Schubert's an idiot, he doesn't know what he's talking about. And it was just so insulting, and I could not believe that anybody would sign a letter like that who's your colleague in an institution like Salk, very small. Since this journal is very pro-tech, biotech, they only gave me like a few hours to reply to this letter. So they sent it to me, and then they gave me a chance to reply, but only it was like overnight. And they sent it to me on a Saturday, so I couldn't really reply very well. So this was my first exposure to this type of thing. And I've been doing science at that point for 30, 40 years, and I've never seen a response like this. And so I just couldn't believe it, that these people would do that.
There are incidences when scientists have completed their career and retired from their positions at FDA or another regulatory agency. When they are no longer at risk of losing their job and providing the necessary livelihood to support their family, then they can tell the truth. We know of this happening in the past, and we know of scientists that are soon to retire that will be able to tell the truth in the not too distant future.
转基因食品的包装上应该强制贴上标志吗？
As I said earlier, there are still people in this country who don't even know what a GMO is. But I think the GMO labeling issue in California 2 years ago, the GMO labeling issue this year in Washington State, that raises the awareness. People they begin to hear about it.
因为转基因的安全性在全球引起广泛争议，从2011年到2013年，美国近30个州动议对转基因食品进行强制标志法案投票。截止到我们调查的时间，只有3个州以有限条件通过了强制标志法案。
您可能注意到，现在公众对这个事儿反应非常大，无论是中国还是美国。比如美国现在很多州要求对这个转基因食品做标识，您怎么看这件事儿？您的态度是什么呢？
The scientific community, not only in the U.S. but in the rest of the world, has determined that the genetically engineered crops are safe to eat, and so I don't see a reason why they need to be labeled.
您觉得应该给公众这样一个选择权或者知情权吗？
Yes, they of course are entitled to the right to choose. The issue in the United States is whether the food should be labeled. This is a very controversial issue. I am not in support of labeling the foods because I believe the foods are nutritionally equivalent and the labeling does not provide any useful information.
实际上就是不做标识，就意味着他们没有办法选择，这是很真实的情况啊。
Companies are still able to indicate that it's a non-genetically modified product or it's an organic product. It's a volunteer labeling.
这个是这个在这个168华人超市购物的这个清单，说明我们这个是花钱买的，因为那个门口贴着偷盗是犯罪的。现在我们一样一样来检查，就是华人经常吃的东西有没有可能躲开转基因，还是说只要你到了美国，就遍地都是转基因？我们来解开这个谜。
非转基因。
来，你们看看这个爆米花，
它这个顶级玉米粒非基因改造。
中国人最爱吃的豆腐。
这个豆腐不清楚。
哎，您来鉴别一下。
这个豆腐不清楚。
这个没有标示还是不是？
现在的问题是这样啊，是因为中国人最喜欢吃豆腐，那这个叫营养嫩豆腐，它没有标。 我们没有办法确定这个是不是含转基因的、含转基因成分的豆腐。
这个呢，它一个是强调有机豆腐，另外呢，他说它是有机大豆生产的。有机大豆呢，它上面还有美国农业部的这个认证的标志，是吧？有机，那么有机的就一定不是转基因的。
那就确定这个不是转基因的。
这个呢更清楚，美国专门有一个经过政府批准的一个认证的公司，它有一个非转基因项目的一个认证，那么这个上头呢就有叫做非转基因认证，这个也有，也是非转基因认证，这个呢也是上面写着就是由非转基因大豆生产。
我们在那么多豆腐里挑出来的这个。 六种，挑出来6种，只有1种说不清楚，但是也不能说它就是转基因大豆生产的，有可能剩下5种都明确的标明了是非转基因大豆，而且有了这个明显的非转基因的标志。不知道这个事情是很早就有，还是最近发生的。
And the companies are, it's affecting the vote because the companies are saying if you vote. That we say if there's GMOs in the food, your food prices are going to go way up.
Yes,
and
they're telling stories.
And so, yeah, and so that's one of the major reasons we can't get it to pass. It doesn't bode well for the rest of the country that two really progressive states that the money could stop us knowing.
They were able to get a few high-profile
scientists and doctors on the airwaves to say that this was unnecessary, to say that it would increase cost, to say that GMOs were completely safe and the science was settled. And as a result, this is what the public saw over and over and over again because of all the money that was poured in. This is why people voted no, in my opinion, on the initiative.
The GMO companies have a vested interest from a financial standpoint because these are all patented products that they receive a royalty on. They not only receive a royalty, but they essentially, through that patent, gain ownership to a farmer's crops. One of the concerns and one of the questions that I've raised many times is, why do you have to ask a farmer who plants your seeds that you're claiming are totally safe to sign a statement that you assume full responsibility for any damage that that crop might cause if it's consumed, rather than the company assuming that liability? But a farmer who receives a genetically engineered seed, before he can receive it, has to sign a statement that he will leave Monsanto or Syngenta or any of the other companies of any liability currently or in the future if there is anything found that would render these products unsafe.
这些东西都是您自己家里种的吗？
So you grow all these fruits
Yes, we
in
do.
your own place?
你有多少地呢？
Maybe 1,000 acres.
非常大。
Big.
啊，你现在的这些豆子里有那个转基因的吗？
Among the beans, anything GMO?
No.
没有。
None of this is GMO.
你知道有这个转基因的这种豆子吗？
Some of them are, yeah.
他知道。
But not ours because we grow ours.
他们不是。
你为什么不种呢？说那种呢，说用农药用的很少，而且产量高。
It's bad for your body.
啊，你认识多少这个从事这个农业生产的这个朋友，像他一样啊？
Oh, all of this is not GMO. Everybody.
你听说过这个转基因？
Have you heard of
这种
GMO
是不是吗？
Yes, and as a small family farm, this is my father's business. We're very against all of that because, you know, it's not the natural way, and we like to respect the earth and our farm because it gives us our business, and we want to take care of it. And
其实我们就是想告诉中国观众一件什么事儿，就是说，在这样的一个这个小区里哈，这就是这个号称中国这个小农贸市场。如果你要愿意买到这个有机食品，也就是说不含转基因的，没有问题。你看我都买到了，豆子、菜花、菜、西红柿、花生、水果，还可以买到这个有机的鸡肉和牛肉。那么这个很多科学家告诉你们说，在美国你是没有办法选择的，因为这个转基因不做标志。现在我就想告诉你们，有的选择，你可以选择有机，可以选择这些小的农场。那么这个农场主的父亲或者爷爷，就是你的父亲或者爷爷的朋友，他们一家3代都在种这些东西，而你们一家3代也在吃他们的放心食品，所以是有的选择的。现在我吃给你们看。这就是我8岁时候吃的那个西红柿的味儿，粉碎四人帮之前西红柿的味儿。
How it's proven to be healthy? That's what I would ask. It's over decades, maybe.
So let me ask out loud. When the USDA approved it, who did the study? For the
companies
USDA
that developed the seeds.
Exactly, the company that put the seeds out. The USDA did not run a second test, did they? No. In fact, in the 1980s, the vice president at the time, what was his name? The guy who couldn't spell potato?
Quayle.
Quayle, thank you. Quayle, Dan Quayle, went to these companies, they had a meeting, and they came up with the concept of substantial equivalent. Because it was substantially equivalent, because GMO corn, according to the companies, was substantially equivalent to regular corn, therefore they didn't need tests. But then, of course, they went to the patent office and said, it's so different, it needs a patent.
他这个农民不用他的手，什么叫农民的手？有力的。他说我不想伤害你。
There's no exit strategy. You know, if you go to a movie house, there's doors that have exit signs in case of fire or whatever. We do not have an exit strategy for GMOs, and GMOs reproduce themselves. So what happens if this all blows up in our face? And this is the long-term threat and the reason to be very precautionary, using the United Nations principle of precaution. We need to proceed very carefully with the GMO question.
这些天，我们了解到了关于转基因的很多情况，有2个事例给我们印象很深。
I've got a brochure called How a Corn Plant Develops by Iowa State, 1993, and they redid it, the same brochure, March 2011, 18 years later. Basically, a corn plant, and at the end of the season, dark green, no signs of any disease. This was normal, no spots on it.
这是哪一年的？
1993. This is the same university, and this is used as a teaching guide across the country, from California to New York. Lo and behold, in this case, they split the stem open. There's browning down in this area. That's plant disease. That's just like gangrene on a human foot. And in the end, when in 1993, the plants were, leaves on the husk were green, no spots. Here, the new normal is diseased. It's just like a room of 100 people and 50 have cancer and 50 have birth defects. You can tell me all day it's normal. Just because you say it's normal doesn't mean it is so.
Our normal breeding programs, we always evaluate for toxic compounds. We never evaluate in a GMO crop for toxic compounds, even though we know that there are many thousands of other changes in the plant that take place when that one protein is expressed, like you have with the BT brinjal, with the Gallagher laboratory, an independent laboratory that took the data that had been submitted for deregulation of BT eggplant. One of those statements is interesting because the company's statement and documentation was that they found no safety problems with the product because they evaluated the male uteri in the GMO fed and the non-GMO fed, and there was no difference. Now, the EPA scientists that evaluated that entire application said we wouldn't expect any differences because the males shouldn't have a uteri. And you see that type of falsification of the safety evaluation. It became so serious in one application that had been submitted for deregulation that even the EPA took the laboratory that had done the studies for the genetic engineering company to court. They obtained 20 felony criminal convictions for perjury and falsification of that data in seeking deregulation of the product. The company was fined $19.2 million. They had 14 of the lab personnel, the director and several personnel. that receive free room and board through prison sentences for falsifying that.
我想说，刚才这2个例子足以让我们产生疑问：支持转基因的人提出的证据究竟是不是真实的呢？
全美的这个大豆出口协会，它的主要的工作方向是什么呢？
To export more soy, increase the profits of our U.S. farmers that we represent. We came from 50 to 55% a year ago, now we're to 60%.
中国的比例有多大呢？大概能占到60%大豆出口里的一个什么比例啊？
Probably half of that, about 35% of that 60 goes into China. Large number, very large.
那我想知道，这些大豆出口的时候，它有这个明确的使用方向吗？就是中国进口，它要用它做什么
？As a farmer and probably working on the Export Council, a lot of them I do not know the destination of those soybeans, what that goes for, whether it goes for human consumption or for animal feed. We don't get into logistics on that.
那我们可以假设一种情况哈，如果中国明年还要进口美国的大豆，但是它只进口这个非转基因的。 会不会也导致我们的农场重新改变这个物种的种植，就是都种非转基因的大豆
？It'll probably increase those acres if China come back as such a huge player in the soybean market. That would affect how many acres are grown in the U.S. because the demand will be there.
像这个美国这个大豆出口协会，它跟中国这个对应的部门是哪个部门呢
？The Ministry of Agriculture in China.
农业部有没有这个反馈过？就是中国公众对这个转基因的这种恐慌，转基因食品和转基因作物的恐慌。
They have mentioned it a little bit, but very little. They have not really given us a big concern over not wanting us to import our soybeans into China. They still accept. I mean, we got acceptance from the Chinese government so we can keep importing our GMO soybeans.
现在在那个网站上有一些投票的这个统计，几乎每一个统计都有80%以上的人表示不吃这个转基因的食品。
Wow, I did not know that. I did not know we didn't have the public survey.
转基因的这个作物哈，它在从实验室进入大田之前，是在做实验种植。实验种植它是有区域限制，然后周边有严格的布防，和传统生物有隔离带啊。中国的这个主食呢是小麦和水稻。目前国内最大的争议是，不要把主粮着急的转基因化，也就是水稻转基因化。但是我们了解的情况，就是这种非法的种植已经非常多了。这种非法种植其实就是从科学家的实验室，或者从他的实验田里发起或者行销的。我们也想到了前不久在中国湖南发生的用孩子们做黄金大米营养实验的这个违背科学伦理的事情。那么当时在网上争论的时候，其中有一派的观点就是说，不管它的程序出了什么问题，黄金大米都是没问题的。但是我们的观点是，当你的程序有问题的时候，我们不想跟你讨论黄金大米有没有价值。
I have no clue of, and I'm not aware of the fact that there is supposed to have been somebody who took it from the fields, or I don't even understand how it got out. Yeah, even if I'm of the opinion that there's no problem from a scientific perspective, that there's no safety concern or no health concern, in fact it's a positive, if the law says that it's not yet approved, then you should not be growing it.
In the United States, scientists are not permitted to do any human experimentation, and certainly not on children, without the proper safety protocols, and that's governed by the National Institute of Health.
刚才我们看了你们的这个试验田，不知道里面是否种的是转基因的作物。有没有可能我们组织一批公众到这个地方来试吃， 把你们试验田里的这个转基因玉米或者其他的品种，把它当场做熟试吃，这个是允许的吗？
Well, okay. As a trial. Unfortunately, you're not allowed to do that. So the rice plants, we put rice genes in rice plants. We don't put any animal genes or bacterial genes, but still, even if it's a rice gene in a rice plant that we develop using a genetic engineering process, we are not allowed to consume the rice ourselves or distribute it to our visitors.
I submit that what we have needed and not had is a 20-year study of humans, of what this can do to the human body before we begin to eat it, not after.
So my recommendation for China is that they should do independent studies, study carefully the effects on wildlife and on humans, and then decide. And indeed, that will be a benefit for the whole humankind, because in the Western world, that is in Europe and North America, it's a commitment to trust the private companies more than anybody else.
We hope that every mother finds out, and parent and everyone in China finds out about GMOs, and really tries, if you are eating them now, just try to go organic for 2 weeks to a month, and see the difference that it makes in your life.
The companies are interested in the Chinese market because they can make more money in China than they can in other countries, and because there aren't in China as many rigid environmental laws as there are in the United States. So it may be easier to exploit the Chinese people even than it is to exploit the American people.
I would think China could find a much better agricultural policy by really working to help learn how to do organic agriculture with native plants than by becoming dependent upon, well, the GMOs are part of the global capitalist system. And I have hoped that China could remain somewhat independent of the global capitalist system.
But if I was to summarize, this would be my statement that future historians may well look back upon our time and write not about how many pounds of pesticides we did or didn't apply, but about how willing we are to sacrifice our children and jeopardize future generations for this massive experiment that we call genetic engineering, that's based on flawed science and failed promises, just to benefit the bottom line of a commercial enterprise.
The important thing about all of this, in terms of understanding, is understanding what it means for this technology. Because even if you don't eat genetically modified foods or foods that contain these ingredients, the simple practice of this in agriculture today is impacting your life. It's impacting the lives of your family, of your children, and of generations to come. And yet the science is so divided on this that any responsible person would at least say that this requires us to take another look.
这就是我们的调查，你们要不信，可以自己来看看。